When my son handed me a cardboard box and told me to be out by Friday, I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. This boy I had coached through Little League sat beside in the hospital when he broke his arm falling off a bicycle, paid 4 years of college tuition for, and I nodded. I picked up that box. I walked out of my own house. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever done everything right, worked hard, loved your family, sacrificed everything, and still ended up with nothing? Because that was me, standing on my own front porch with a cardboard box at 63 years old. My name is not important. What matters is this. I am a retired high school history teacher from Columbus, Ohio. 31 years in the classroom. I coached JV baseball on the side for 12 of those years. My wife Lorraine, she passed from ovarian cancer 8 years ago, and after she was gone, it was just me and my son Everett, and whatever life we could make together. I sold the house Lorraine and I had shared for 26 years after she passed. I couldn't stay there. Every room had her in it, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, the lavender smell of her pillow that I swear lasted 2 full years before it finally faded. I sold it and moved into a smaller place on Crestwood Drive. 3 bedrooms, a good yard, close to the park where I walked every morning. I paid cash. The house cost me $340,000, and I put it in my name, no mortgage. That was my retirement, my peace, my ground. Everett had always been a decent kid. Quiet, a little serious, but decent. He married a woman named Sondra when he was 28. I liked Sondra fine at first. She was sharp, put together, had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. I told myself that was confidence. I told myself that was good. I was wrong about what it was. 3 years into their marriage, Everett lost his job. He was in logistics management and the company restructured, and he was let go with 2 weeks severance and a handshake. Sondra worked in pharmaceutical sales, but her income alone wasn't covering their rent in Dublin, their 2 car payments, and the credit card debt they had somehow accumulated without my knowing. They came to me. I want to be clear about something. I didn't invite them in because I was lonely, though I was. I didn't do it because I felt guilty about anything, though sometimes I still wonder if I should have. I did it because Everett was my son. You don't turn away your child. Lorraine would not have turned him away, and I wasn't going to either. I told them they could stay in the 2 spare bedrooms, one to sleep, one for Sondra's home office, and that we would figure it out together as a family. That first month was fine. The second month, things started to shift in ways I couldn't name yet. Sondra began referring to the house differently. Not your house, or even the house, just here. As in, we should paint here. As in, the neighbors have been asking who lives here. Small thing, I noticed it and let it go. By the 4th month, she had rearranged the living room without asking. My recliner, the chair I had sat in every single evening for 9 years, the chair where I graded papers and watched baseball and fell asleep, was moved to the corner near the hallway. A new sectional sofa appeared, grey microfiber, something she had ordered online. When I asked about the recliner, she said she thought I'd appreciate having somewhere quieter to sit. I asked Everett about it that night. He said, "Dad, she's just trying to make it feel like home for her too." I understood that. I really did. So I let it go. By month 6, Sondra had begun suggesting that I eat dinner earlier, 6 o'clock instead of 7, because she and Everett liked to have the kitchen to themselves in the evenings. My kitchen. The kitchen where I had made Sunday pot roasts for 30 years. She said it nicely. She always said things nicely. Around that same time, Everett found a new job. Not in logistics this time. He went into commercial real estate. The commission structure was good, he said. He was optimistic. I was happy for him. What I didn't know was that Sondra had already begun talking to him about the house. I found out gradually, the way you find out most painful things, in pieces, Over time, each piece small enough to dismiss, until suddenly you're holding the whole picture and you can't look away from it. The first piece was a conversation I overheard one evening when I came in from my walk earlier than usual. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just walking down the hallway to get a glass of water, and their bedroom door was open a few inches, and Sondra's voice came through clearly. She was saying something about property values on Crestwood Drive, and how the market was up 14% year over year, and that a house like this, well-maintained, 3 bedrooms in this school district could list for close to $500,000. I stopped walking. She said, "He doesn't need 3 bedrooms. He doesn't even use the backyard anymore." I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I told myself I had misunderstood. I told myself he was probably just talking about the market generally. She was in real estate adjacent, professionally speaking. It was probably nothing. That is what I told myself. 3 months later, Everett sat down with me at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. He had coffee in his hand and a look on his face that I recognized from when he was 17 and had dented my car. He said, "Dad, Sondra and I have been thinking." He told me they had found a financial advisor. He told me that at my age, a paid-off house was an underperforming asset. He told me that if I sold the house, I could put the equity into an annuity, have a steady income stream, and move somewhere with more support structures, his phrase, not mine. He mentioned a senior living community in Westerville. He had a brochure. I looked at the brochure. I looked at my son. I said, "Everett, I'm 63 years old. I walk 2 miles every morning. I cook my own meals. I don't need a senior community." He said Sondra thought I was isolating myself. I said, "Sondra has lived in my house for 8 months, and she thinks she knows how I live." He got quiet in that way he had when he didn't want to have the real conversation. I let it go again. That was my mistake. I kept letting things go because I kept believing that the decent kid I had raised was still in there somewhere, and that if I just waited long enough, he would find his way back. The pressure didn't stop. It became a current in the house, constant and low, like a sound you can't quite hear but can feel in your teeth. Sondra stopped acknowledging me in the mornings. Everett became unavailable in a way that was very deliberate, always busy, always tired, always on a call. The small courtesies that had made cohabitation bearable disappeared one by one, until the house I owned felt like a waiting room I had wandered into by accident. In January, this was 14 months after they had moved in, Everett came to me again. This time Sondra was with him. She sat at my kitchen table with a folder, an actual folder. She slid a document across the table and said it was a proposal for a voluntary property transfer that would put the house in both their names, with an agreement that I could remain as a tenant for up to 5 years. A tenant in my own house. I didn't raise my voice. I am not a man who raises his voice. I picked up the folder, I handed it back, and I said, "This conversation is over." That night, Sondra told Everett that I was becoming paranoid and confused, that I wasn't thinking clearly, that the responsible thing, the loving thing, might be to explore having me evaluated. I know this because Everett told me, 6 months later, crying at my kitchen table, that he had believed her, that he had been scared enough to believe her. At 63 years old, a man who could still name every American president in order and quote the Gettysburg Address from memory, my son had been convinced that I was losing my mind because I refused to sign over my home. In February, things moved fast. Sondra had apparently been consulting with a real estate attorney because she knew exactly what she was doing when she filed a petition with the Franklin County Probate Court claiming that I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own financial affairs and requesting appointment as my legal guardian. I want you to sit with that for a second. My daughter-in-law, a woman I had opened my home to, fed, welcomed, treated with nothing but decency, was trying to have the court declare me incompetent so that she could take control of my assets. I found out when a process server knocked on my door on a Thursday morning. I read those papers standing in my own doorway, and I felt something I had not felt since Lorraine's last night in the hospital. A kind of hollow, cold stillness. Like the world had gone quiet and small. I called my attorney, a woman named Rosalind, my attorney, not theirs, and she told me to document everything, say nothing to Sondra or Everett, and let her handle it. I did exactly that. What I did not know, while all of this was happening, was what my daughter was doing. I should tell you about Nadine. She is my daughter from my first marriage, Lorraine's stepdaughter, though Lorraine never once made that distinction. She loved Nadine like her own, and Nadine loved her back just the same. Nadine is 41 years old, lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, works as a pediatric occupational therapist. She is quiet in the way that rivers are quiet, still on the surface, moving fast underneath. Nadine had visited twice during the months that Everett and Sondra were in the house. Both times she had said very little about what she observed, but I could see it in her face, the way she watched Sondra rearrange things. The way she looked at Everett when he deferred to his wife mid-sentence. She had asked me, quietly, during her second visit, if I was okay. I had said yes. I had been lying. When the guardianship petition was filed, I called Nadine. I didn't want to pull her into it, but Rosalind said I needed people who could speak to my character and my capacity, people who had known me over years. And Nadine was the first person I thought of. She drove up from Charlotte the next day. She did not call ahead. She pulled into the driveway at 7 in the morning and knocked on my door. And when I opened it, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Dad, I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner." I don't have words for what that felt like. After months of feeling like a stranger in my own life, my daughter looked at me and saw me. That was enough to hold on to. The court hearing was set for late April. In the weeks leading up to it, Rosalind built a case that was, I was told, unusually straightforward. 2 physicians, including my primary care doctor of 11 years, submitted evaluations confirming my full cognitive capacity. 4 colleagues from my teaching years, a neighbor, and 2 members of my church submitted written statements. Nadine submitted an affidavit that was, Rosalind said, one of the clearest pieces of testimony she had read in 20 years of practice. Everett did not submit anything. He had stopped speaking to Sondra by then, though I didn't know that yet. At the hearing, Sondra's attorney presented the case. The judge, a measured, unreadable woman in her 50s, asked a number of questions. Then she asked me to respond to 2 historical questions and to summarize my financial situation in general terms. I did so without notes. The judge looked at Sondra's attorney for a long moment. The petition was dismissed. Outside the courthouse, Sondra walked to her car without looking at me. I stood on the courthouse steps with Rosalind and Nadine, and the April sun was warm on my face, and I breathed. But it wasn't over yet. Rosalind filed a counter-complaint with the Ohio State Bar, citing Sondra's attorney's conduct. She also contacted the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, because during discovery we had uncovered something that changed the shape of everything. Sondra had, at some point in the previous several months, accessed my online banking through a shared computer I kept in the living room. She had transferred $4,200 to an account in her name, apparently testing what she could do before the petition was decided. She had also, and this was worse, forged my signature on a document attempting to add herself as a co-owner on a secondary savings account I held at a credit union. Forgery. Bank fraud. That is what it was. I did not know any of this until Rosalind told me. I sat in her office, and I looked at the documents, and I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was something in between. Something like the sound of a door closing that you know will not open again. Everett called me that evening. He was crying before he finished saying my name. He said he hadn't known about the account transfers. He said he hadn't known about the forged document. He said he had believed Sondra about a lot of things, and that he was ashamed of what he had let happen in my house to me, while he had stood by and told himself he was trying to keep the peace. I didn't say much. I let him talk. When he was finished, I said, "I know you love me, Everett, and I know that isn't enough right now for either of us, but I'm listening." We talked for 2 hours. Sandra was arrested in May. She was charged with 2 counts of financial elder abuse under Ohio Revised Code, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of bank fraud. The DA's office moved quickly. They did not like the targeting of elderly residents, and they had good documentation. She pled no contest to the forgery and 1 count of financial elder abuse in exchange for the other charges being dropped. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, required to repay the full amount taken plus interest, and barred from any fiduciary role involving vulnerable adults. Everett filed for divorce 2 weeks after the arrest. I want to be honest with you. I did not feel triumphant. When I heard about the sentencing, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the neighborhood wake up, and what I felt was tired. Not defeated. Tired. The way you feel after a long illness when you realize you're going to recover, but the recovery itself is going to take time. Here is what I did not know through all of it. Through the months of pressure, the rearranged furniture, the brochure for the senior community, the court petition, all of it. I did not know what Nadine had been doing. She had flown to Columbus the day I called her about the petition, but she had also, in the 2 months prior, without saying anything to me, without asking me to validate it or participate in it, been quietly building a financial cushion. For years, Nadine and I had a small informal arrangement. Whenever I had a good year or received a small windfall, a year when my investments did well, a small inheritance from my uncle some years back, I had given her amounts here and there, nothing massive, the way you do for your children when you can, and they need it. She had kept track of all of it, every amount, every date, in a small notebook she had carried for years. In those 2 months before she came to Columbus, she had quietly liquidated a long-term investment account she had opened years earlier, specifically to pay me back one day. She had said nothing because she wanted it to be done before she told me, so that it could not be argued about, or refused, or turned into a conversation about whether I needed it. The month after the sentencing, Nadine came to visit again. She stayed a week. On the 3rd day of her visit, she put a sealed envelope on the kitchen table and pushed it toward me and said, "Open it, Dad." Inside was a cashier's check for $67,000 and a letter in her handwriting. The letter said, "I've been keeping track for 20 years. This is what I owe you with interest. Don't argue with me. This is not a gift. This is a debt being paid. You kept your word to me every single time. I'm keeping mine." I held that check for a long time without speaking. Outside, a cardinal was doing something energetic in the holly bush by the front window. The rain had planted that bush. Nadine said, "Dad, say something." I said, "Your mother would have loved this moment." She laughed. Then she cried. Then I did too. We sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I want to tell you what I know now that I did not know before any of this happened. I know that letting people into your life, your home, your space, your daily rhythms is an act of trust that deserves to be examined carefully, even when it is your own family. Not because family can't be trusted, but because the people around them sometimes can't be. Everett was not a villain. He was a man who loved his wife more than he trusted his own judgment, and who let that love be used against him and against me. That is a different thing from malice. It is not a forgivable thing easily, but it is a human thing. I know that quiet loyalty, the kind Nadine showed, the kind that doesn't announce itself or ask for recognition, is the most durable kind. She did not rescue me dramatically. She just showed up, drove through the night, filed affidavits, kept a notebook for 20 years. Ordinary faithfulness repeated over time. That is what saved me. I know that the hardest moment was not the court hearing or the arrest or even the morning the process server knocked on my door. The hardest moment was standing in my own hallway in the dark, having just overheard my daughter-in-law calculate the value of my home, and choosing to walk back to my room quietly and say nothing. Because in that moment I was still trying to protect the peace. I was still choosing kindness over clarity, and kindness without clarity, I have learned, is just a longer way of losing. I still live on Crestwood Drive. The recliner is back in its place by the window. I walk 2 miles every morning. On Sunday evenings, I call Nadine and we talk for an hour, sometimes more. Everett calls on Thursdays. We are finding our way back, slowly, in the tentative way of two people who have hurt each other, and are both trying to remember what they were to each other before the damage was done. It is enough. For now, it is enough. And if you are sitting somewhere tonight feeling like your kindness has been used against you, like the door to your own life is being quietly closed from the inside, I want you to hear this. You are not confused. You are not paranoid. You are not too old to protect what is yours. You built it. You earned it. And you are allowed to stand in the middle of it and refuse to move. That is the thing no one put in a brochure. I keep coming back to that cardinal in the holly bush. The morning Nadine pushed that envelope across the table, I wasn't looking at the check. I was watching that bird out the window, doing whatever cardinals do in late spring, completely unbothered by what had just happened inside my kitchen. And I thought, that's what it looks like, to just exist where you belong. No argument, no justification, just there. I spent a long time in this story being quiet when I should have spoken. I told myself it was patience. I told myself it was grace. But if I'm honest, and I'm old enough now to be honest with myself, a lot of it was fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being the difficult one. Fear that if I pushed back, I would lose what little family I had left after Lorraine was gone. So I let things slide. The recliner, the kitchen schedule, the brochure. Each one felt small enough to absorb. Together they nearly cost me everything. What Sandra did was wrong in ways the law eventually named clearly, but the deeper wrong, the one I have to sit with, is that I watched it happen in slow motion and chose comfort over clarity, month after month. That is not a moral failure in the dramatic sense. It is something quieter and more common, the failure to trust what you already know to be true. I knew. I heard it in that hallway. I felt it every morning when I walked through a living room that no longer looked like mine. I knew, and I told myself I was mistaken, because knowing would have required acting, and acting would have required courage. I wasn't sure I still had. That's the thing about getting older that nobody tells you honestly. The world will test whether your integrity is still load-bearing, whether the values you taught your children, posted on classroom walls, lived by for 30 years, whether they actually hold when something real is pressing against them. Sandra's scheme collapsed, not because the universe corrected itself automatically, but because Rosalind filed the right documents. Nadine drove through the night, 4 colleagues wrote letters, and a judge asked 2 simple questions I could answer without notes. Justice, when it came through people doing specific things with their specific skills on specific days. Character showed up as action. That is all it ever is. And Nadine, what she did wasn't dramatic. She kept a notebook. She opened an investment account years ago and left it alone. She drove to Columbus when I called. These are not heroic gestures. They are the accumulated result of a person who decided a long time ago what kind of daughter she wanted to be, and then just kept being that, quietly, without an audience. That kind of steadiness is harder than it looks. It requires you to keep your word when no one is watching and there is no immediate reward. It requires a kind of internal toughness that doesn't announce itself, the toughness of just continuing to show up correctly year after year, even when the people around you aren't. Everett is still finding his footing. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's true, and because I think he's going to be okay. He let himself be misled, and that cost both of us. and now he is doing the slower, harder work of figuring out who he is when no one is managing him. I respect that work, even when it's uncomfortable to watch. I still walk 2 miles every morning. The recliner is back where it belongs. The house is quiet, in the way that a house should be quiet, because it is at peace, not because it has been emptied. If I could say one thing to someone sitting where I was sitting 18 months ago, it would be this: your discomfort is information. The moment you start feeling like a guest in your own life, that is not a feeling to manage, it is a fact to address. You are allowed to know what you know. You are allowed to act on it. And the people who truly love you will still be there when you do. The cardinal is still in the holly bush most mornings. I've started leaving the window cracked.